All right. Here we go. All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's webinar, Workers, Food Safety, and the Global Pandemic. We're going to get started in just a minute with our exciting lineup of speakers. I'm Rebecca Wolf with Food and Water Watch, and I want to give folks just a second to hop on here. If you are at a computer, we highly recommend clicking the link to join the video. You'll be able to see us through the program we're using called Zoom. We will email around the recording to everyone who signed up in the beginning, so don't worry if you can't in fact hop on video. The recording will also be available on our Facebook Live if you're joining us there. Hello tonight. I can see folks are hopping on, and we're going to get started in just 1 second here. Wonderful. I know we're a minute past here, so I'm going to get going. Welcome to the webinar, Workers, Food Safety, and the Global Pandemic. Again, I'm Rebecca Wolf with Food and Water Watch, and we have a fantastic lineup of speakers here with us tonight. I'm going to introduce them in just a moment, but first I want to take a moment to acknowledge that tonight we will be talking about the COVID-19 pandemic that has exposed the cracks in our already very broken food system. But we also know that our food and agricultural systems have long histories of violence and systemic racism against Black people. At Food and Water Watch, we stand in solidarity with the movement for Black Lives demands and with action against racism and state-sponsored violence. It is our responsibility to stand with our allies for racial and environmental justice. I'd like to just take a brief pause to acknowledge the struggle for justice against violence happening in cities across the country right now. Thank you for being with us here tonight. Before we get started, I'm going to give you a quick orientation if you're new to joining us on Zoom, but I know people have been using Zoom a lot. We're going to get started right now. We're here on video, and you will be able to see all of the speakers as they share. If you click the link you receive in your email, don't worry, we can't see you. We will be keeping everyone on mute to cut down on background noise, and if you have a question at any point in the presentation, you can click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We're going to get to as many of those as possible throughout the end of the webinar, but we are going to start with the questions that you wrote into us when you RSVP'd. So just bear with us. We have a lot of amazing speakers. We're going to try to answer those most asked questions first. I'll also note that we won't be using the raise hand button if you're joining us on Zoom. So just again, click that Q&A button if you want to ask a question. And if you have any technical issues or you're joining us over the phone and have any questions, you can email us at help@fwaction.org. We have folks standing by to help you with that. So right now our food system is essentially a house of cards that the meat industry has created. Agribusiness giants claim that the current food system with its factory farms and extreme levels of concentration is necessary to keep everyone fed. They often claim in coded racist ways that workers are to blame for the spread of coronavirus in meatpacking plants, but not their refusal to provide protective equipment or paid sick leave to these workers. And much to their dismay, this coronavirus pandemic is destroying that carefully crafted narrative. In fact, many people across the country, I'm sure you joining us right now, are seeing that this highly concentrated industrial food system harms our neighbors, our farmers, animals, and the environment, and it is in fact less resilient than the regional diversified system it replaced. So tonight we're going to hear from expert organizers, policymakers, and activists across the industry. First, we're going to have Tony Corbo. Tony is my colleague and the senior lobbyist for the food campaign at Food and Water Watch. He is responsible for food-related legislative and regulatory issues that come before Congress and the executive branch. He has extensive organizing experience, having directed major public employee representation campaigns in several states, and he has also directed political campaigns at various levels and has served as the administrative assistant to a member of Congress. After that, we're going to have Representative DeLauro. Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro serves in the Democratic leadership as co-chair of the Democratic Steering and Policy Committee, and she is the chair of the Labor, Health, and Human Services and Education Appropriation Subcommittee, where she oversees our nation's investments in education, health, and employment. She also serves on the subcommittee responsible for the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. She's a leader in fighting for modernizing our food safety system, as well as legislation that would give all working families an opportunity to succeed. After Representative DeLauro, we will have Darci Trohman at Nebraska Appleseed. She will be reading translated testimony from 2 slaughterhouse workers in Nebraska. Darci is director of Nebraska Appleseed's Immigrants and Communities Program. Nebraska Appleseed is a statewide, multi-issue, multi-strategy nonprofit that combines community organizing, public policy, impact litigation, and the mission of the Immigrants and Communities Program is to promote strong, vibrant, inclusive, and engaged communities. Darci has worked with immigrant communities in the Great Plains for 20 years and has worked on issues of meat and poultry safety for more than 15 years. She's also served as a founding board member with Welcoming America. After that, we're going to have Paula Skelling. In 1987, Paula became a federal employee for the United States Department of Agriculture. Paula later joined the American Federation of Government Employees of Food Inspection Locals as a union member and became vice president of AFGE Local 0666 in 2000, and then local president from 2002 to 2012. So she has a ton of leadership experience. Currently, Paula serves as the secretary treasurer, and in 2010, she served as the Northern Council vice president and then was elected president in 2012. In 2012, she was elected to the National Joint Council as the Secretary Treasurer, representing bargaining unit employees covered under the Labor Management Agreement. And since 2019, she has served as the NJC Acting Chairwoman. And finally, speaking tonight, we're going to have Axel Fuentes. Axel is an immigrant from Guatemala, and he is the Executive Director of the Rural Community Workers Alliance in Milan, Missouri. He's been organizing communities and advocating for immigrant workers for over a decade in rural areas of the United States. And in April 2020, just this year, Rural Community Workers Alliance sued Smithfield Foods over the company's alleged failure to provide adequate personal protective equipment to the workers at its Milan, Missouri meatpacking facility. While the suit was ultimately dismissed, it did result in very significant improvements in safety for workers in the plant amid the pandemic. Following the presentations from our speakers tonight, we're going to have some questions to answer some of the questions you submitted to our panelists. You're really going to want to stick with us through this incredible lineup, and I've only just summarized some of the incredible work that they've all done. So I want to thank them for what they do every day and for being here with us tonight. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Tony to get us started.
Thank you, Rebecca. And I want to acknowledge my fellow panelists because I've worked directly or indirectly with all of them over the last 20 years that I've been working on food safety. Congresswoman DeLauro is the preeminent expert on food safety in the Congress, and we've joined forces on a number of issues over the years. And Paula Skelling, her work through the union and her courageous members in terms of providing proper food inspection and stepping forward whenever there are issues that need to be revealed about how food safety is not being properly followed in the plants. And Darci Trohman, I started working with Darci in 2011 when she started to educate me about the abuses that meatpacking workers suffer in the industry, and she's taught me a lot over the years. And finally, Axel, while I've never worked with him directly, I provided an affidavit in support of the lawsuit that he brought against Smithfield a few weeks ago. So I'm really honored to be with my friends tonight. Food production was designated part of the essential infrastructure and needed to operate during the pandemic. So according to the Midwest Center for Investigative Reporting that has tried to keep track of the number of illnesses and deaths in the meatpacking plants, as of June the 3rd, there have been at least 23,000 reported positive cases of COVID-19 tied to meatpacking facilities in 216 plants in 33 states, and at least 74 reported worker deaths at 35 plants in 21 states. 4 USD inspectors have also died from COVID-19, and several hundred have tested positive from the virus. There have been attempts across the country to keep the actual statistics hidden from the public, and we have to rely on the work of media outlets such as the Midwest Center to get a handle on what's really going on. And so the spread of COVID among meatpacking workers has not been unique to the United States. There have been reports of outbreaks in meatpacking plants in Europe, Brazil, and other countries, and that have emerged as hotspots in meatpacking facilities there. But what the COVID-19 outbreak has done is put a focus on how dangerous the workers in meat and poultry processing face day in and day out, even without a pandemic. These workers work in close proximity to one another, which lends itself to a whole host of occupational hazards. Some reporters have observed that very little has changed from Upton Sinclair's The Jungle, and they are right. According to OSHA, workers in meatpacking suffer among the highest rates of injuries of all workers in all industries. I've come to appreciate that issue in my food safety work. One of the problems is that OSHA has been chronically underfunded, does not have enough inspectors, and has not established meaningful standards to enforce. And this administration has really crippled the agency even further. Another issue that is the rate of injuries is most likely understated in this industry because many of the workers are immigrants and are afraid to file complaints for fear of reprisal. And Darci Trohman Howser from Nebraska Appleseed will give more specific data later in the program on that issue. But among the hazards that are commonly found in meatpacking plants that OSHA has found include industrial accidents caused by machinery. Machinery such as head splitters, bone splitters, snout pullers, and jaw pullers, as well as bandsaws and cleavers, pose potential hazards to workers at various stages of processing of animal carcasses. There's a high rate of amputations among workers who suffer these injuries. Knife cuts is another major cause of injury that lead to cuts and abrasions on hands and torso. The hand knife remains the most commonly used tool and causes the most frequent and severe accidents. Workers have also been cut by other workers as they remove their knives from a slab of meat. So these are called neighbor cuts and are usually the direct result of overcrowded working conditions. Another source of injury are falls. These floors in these facilities are slippery from animal fat and other animal parts that accumulate on the floor, blood, and there's usually poor drainage. So falls are another big source of injuries. Back injuries. When folks are required to essentially carry or lug 300 pounds of meat on their backs, they wind up getting back injuries. Then there's a whole host of toxic substances that these workers are exposed to. Ammonia is used as a refrigerant in these plants, and oftentimes there are leaks, and that can lead to eye irritation, respiratory issues, nausea, and so that's another source of injuries in meatpacking. Some workers have been exposed to unsafe levels of carbon dioxide because dry ice is commonly used in the packing process. And so carbon dioxide gas is given off and causes illnesses among the workers. Carbon monoxide is another issue where that gas is formed when other gases form when it mixes with other gases in the meatpacking plants, and that causes issues. There are problems with thermal degradation products of polyvinyl chloride that is used in food wrap. So that's another source. And then there are caustic antimicrobials that are used in the industry where OSHA has not established any standards. And one of the things that the industry does is increase ventilation in order to dissipate some of these caustic chemicals that are used. And so you have now a virus that can be spread airborne. And so if you have to increase the ventilation to deal with the antimicrobials, you may be using the ventilation system to spread the virus. And if anybody is interested, there's a USDA directive 7120.1. There's 84 pages of chemicals that are used in the food industry that while they've been found to be safe for food safety purposes, they do not have any OSHA standards from an occupational standpoint. And last but not least, there are cumulative trauma disorders. This is where workers, because of repetitive motion, suffer from carpal tunnel syndrome, tendinitis, and these issues wind up crippling these workers. What you often find in these plants is the fact that a lot of the workers are not afforded paid sick leave. They report to work sick, and they are penalized if they do take off from work. And one of the things that I remember that Nebraska Appleseed brought forth back in 2012 when we were fighting the proposed rule that would deregulate poultry inspection is the fact that a lot of workers essentially wear diapers. They wear adult diapers on the slaughter line because they are afraid to ask for breaks. So they're defecating and urinating on the slaughter line. So as we go through the rest of the program, I just wanted to set the stage in terms of how abusive this industry really is to its workers, and we really need to address the problems in the meatpacking industry from an occupational safety standpoint. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Tony. And thanks for setting the stage for that. I think it was a really great opening to what everyone else is going to talk about as well. And Tony, to his credit too, does a lot of really wonderful work and has for a long time with Food and Water Watch, really a watchdog on this industry. So thank you for getting us started. And we're going to mention a bill that everyone is going to kind of touch on the pieces of, and that's going to be really important today. It's Senate Bill 3677, and it is a bill that we're going to drop the link in Zoom right now, as well as on Facebook in a minute here, to sign the petition. Others will probably touch on it, but it is an OSHA rule that we already touched on OSHA a little bit, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, but it's a safety rule for workers right now. And so we're going to touch on that. Next, I'm really excited to introduce Representative Dolores. She's the U.S. Representative for Connecticut's 3rd Congressional District and a champion on this issue as well. I'm going to unmute you now. Let's see, Katie, can you unmute? I do not have that unmute capability. Doesn't look like the unmute is unmuting you. See the button in the bottom left? Sorry, Zoom has changed its privacy features, and so it's not letting me unmute.
That do it?
There you are. Sorry about that. We love privacy features, but there you go.
Wonders of technology here. So thank you so much, Rebecca. I am really delighted to join with you tonight. This is an important conversation. Let me say, before I want to make my comments, I want to take my cue from you, Rebecca. These are really very powerful times. And I think that, and while we have been talking about the pandemic and how we get back to normal, when you hear what's going on in our country, there's cries for justice, the chance for social justice, and the cries for equality. Going back is not good enough. And what we have to do is, while we are fighting this COVID virus, what we have to do is to take a look at the virus of injustice and be focused in that area as well. So I am, again, very, very pleased to join the conversation because I think it is a critical conversation. And when you talk about food production is, essential, and it is. And but what we have, what we are seeing is that while we are claiming that food production is essential, we are not looking at food production workers. They are essential, and what does that mean in terms of our caring for them? So I'm pleased to join with you as you help to elevate worker safety, to elevate legislation that we need to move forward and to get passed and advocate for. And to Tony Corbo, I'm just going to call him my co-conspirator. I can, you know, where were we on Chinese chicken, imported chicken, line speeds. But I will just tell you that as I was sitting when I had the opportunity to chair the subcommittee on agriculture and appropriations, Tony was always in the audience, and I could always count on getting several emails about what was being said, its truth or not truth, and he would give me what the facts were. So he's a dear friend and someone who I count on in the work that I do there. And I just want to say, with regard to Food and Water Watch 2005, you've become renowned really for rigorous analysis and really deft advocacy, working in local communities, advocating for fair policies, legal actions, investigating the issues that we see. Your values that you bring to this are so critically important: a healthy, livable environment, human dignity, justice for all, and economic fairness. And I'm pleased to join with Paula. And Darci, did you graduate from the School of Public Law and Government at Columbia with a master's degree? I don't know if they changed their names, but that was what it was when I was there. So many, many years before you, though, Darci. And Axel, happy to listen to you. The pandemic is the biggest economic and health crisis that this country has faced in a century. Members of the frontline food supply chain workforce, food processing, meat and poultry plant employees, farm workers, the essential role that they play in the continued availability of food products. And by failing to fully protect this workforce, we not only jeopardize their personal health, but risk a continued increase in the closure of food processing facilities. We are seeing the costs of failing to protect workers at food processing plants nationwide. According to analysis by The Guardian that was released on May 15th, let me quote, at least 12 of the 25 hotspots in the US counties with the highest per capita infection rates originated in meat factories where employees work side by side in cramped conditions. And the failure to protect workers, you don't only endanger essential components of the economy, we are endangering their lives every single day. We're endangering their lives. And you know, look, I had a hearing today with the head of the CDC, and just trying to look at what CDC has or has not been doing in dealing with this pandemic. And I made the point, and I have a chart that's here, that in March, we had 556 cases. We now have over 20,000 on June 2nd. On March 13th, we had 7 deaths, and now we have 1,000 deaths a day. So we declared a national emergency around the 556 cases that we had, and we are not considering it a national emergency when we're looking at over 20,000, and when, as what you know, what was pointed out, we're looking at 23,000 cases in the food production area. So I have the opportunity as chairing the House Appropriations Subcommittee with oversight in the Department of Labor that I'm committed to defending and empowering working people. We provided $582 million for the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. This was an increase above what we did in 2019. The issues with respect to workers in food and agriculture have been a focus of mine. I've served on the committee since 1993. I was the top Democrat in 2005. I chaired the committee in 2007. I had the opportunity to write several appropriations bills funding the Department of Agriculture, was on the conference committee in 2008 on the Farm Bill. So I'm familiar with the department's authorities and how they can best be utilized. And I'm currently the vice chair of the Ag Appropriations Committee. The first thing we need to realize is that far too many meatpacking companies, where the health and safety of their workers is far from their first priority. Tony laid out what is going on in the industry, the conditions within these plants, the nature of the work itself, the line speeds, repetitive motions, the cramped quarters puts workers at increased risk. And I say this, I've been to meat processing plants. I've been to the poultry, the slaughterhouses. People are shoulder to shoulder there. So, and the point is, they are usually minorities and women and people who are undocumented, and they are in the best of circumstances, they are in bad circumstances. And now you add to that the corona virus. The reported rate of illnesses before the pandemic in poultry plants was more than 6 times the average for all U.S. industries. This is according to the National Employment Law Project. And now they are even at greater risk. I have been critical, and that's why I continue to be critical of the guidelines for meat processing workers that was released in May by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, along with the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. In my view, the guidance is far too weak. It allows too much room for the big meat corporations to skirt meaningful worker protections. For example, CDC guidelines contain the word, quote, if, more than 40 times, often accompanied by the phrase, if feasible and if possible. Give me a break.
Oh, good.
Nothing is going to happen. Nothing will happen. Thus, a corporation can be in compliance with the CD guidelines simply for considering the measures recommended by the CDC. Let me be clear. The safety of workers should never be based on the condition of if feasible. CDC has to strengthen the guidelines without any outside pressure from the industry, and then OSHA must commit to enforcing the guidelines. That is exactly what has happened with our previous CDC guidelines under the Obama administration, and that is what must happen in this case. We cannot allow industry to self-regulate itself any longer. For those of us in government, we need to act to ensure strong worker protections for meat processing workers rather than simply relying on the goodwill of these corporations. We need federal leadership and its unique scale. Excuse me when I say this. I wrote a book 3 or 4 years ago, and I said that if we relied, the first paragraph of the book, if we relied on the goodwill of the corporations, then we are all screwed. And I mean that very sincerely. I have worked with Chef Andres, Secretary Vilsack, Secretary and others. And what we did was we created an action plan to safeguard the nation's food supply and its workers. Amongst the priorities, we called on the administration to unite expertise from various government agencies. I said USDA's Food Safety and Inspection Service, FSIS, should create an intergovernmental task force with the CDC, the FDA, and the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, to establish, implement, ensure compliance with recommendations to ensure worker safety during the pandemic. Ensure that food processors and distributors are operating with proper health, safety protocols, will enable a more robust food supply system and avoid a concentration of burden and risk on a few suppliers still in operation. USDA and its federal partners we need to prioritize the food supply chain workforce for testing, access to personal protective equipment, and treatment.
That's right.
Review and modify existing regulatory waivers of federal meat inspection requirements to meet recommended food safety and health guidelines. Direct meat packing companies to reduce production line speeds and require them to provide employees with social distancing and physical barriers. I think these are issues where we'll get strong support in the Congress. The plan went to Secretary Perdue. He hasn't yet engaged in it. The worker safety issue is paramount. We cannot exclude we should exclude corporate giveaways like indemnifying employees from liability if their employees get sick on the job. And that is what we're looking at with Senator McConnell, the president, and Republicans in the Congress. It's an abject fail of leadership in my view. Look, I've gone on much too long in terms of your program, but we have put in funding in the CARES Act, in the HEROES Act. We included $15 million in the Department of Labor. We're going to get into the appropriation process. It will be my goal to get into the Labor HHS appropriations bill of funding so that we can deal with some of these issues. Thank you for letting me be a part of this conversation tonight. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing all of that. And I think I'm going to ask you a question, hopefully at the end too, about all of the different policy, but I think you did a really wonderful job of kind of sharing the overview of there's so many moving pieces to this, and you've really been a champion on it. So thank you for sharing all of that. I'm going to next, if you have any questions for Congresswoman DeLauro, post them in the Q&A. Again, we have that petition for you to sign. Remember to do that. And next, I'm gonna pass it over to Darci Trohman Howser of Nebraska Appleseed.
Great, thank you, Rebecca. I'm really honored to be here tonight with this group. And I'll start off with just one more layer of brief background about how dangerous the meat and poultry industry was to begin with, and how this new COVID-19 threat to life layers on top of that. And then I'll share some voices and experiences from Nebraska men and women working in the packing plants. So as you've been hearing, the meat and poultry industry has a decades-long record of alarmingly high injury rates, inhuman work speeds that cause permanently disabling injuries, and aggressive efforts to reduce safety oversight. So that work design was already causing a dual public health hazard of crippling injuries and food safety risks. Now in a pandemic, it's putting our food system in jeopardy, and it's a central vector for rural community outbreaks. Over a decade of community and academic studies document the high injury rates, and the titles alone give you a sense of the extreme work environment. Blood, sweat, and fear, the speed kills you, always working beyond the capacity of our bodies. When we're dead and buried, our bones will keep hurting. Our work speed petition, Nebraska Appleseed, together with Southern Poverty Law Center and many other worker centers in 2013, did a work speed snapshot in which workers from a number of different plants described 20,000 to 100,000 grueling repetitive motions per shift in close quarters conditions. And the studies found injury rates of 40, 60%, 80%, and even higher. So Wake Forest School of Medicine found 60% of poultry workers had evidence of carpal tunnel, which, as you've heard, is a painful and permanently disabling condition. The NIOSH study of a poultry plant found 42% of workers had symptoms of carpal tunnel, and 2/3 of those reported awakening from sleep because of the pain. Southern Poverty Law Center found 77% of poultry workers reported injuries in their hands and wrists. In some work areas, the rates were even higher than that. with swelling, numbness, inability to close their hands. And our Nebraska Appleseed study found 62% of workers reporting describing injuries from the previous year. So common comments that we heard before COVID-19 were things like, they scream at you, they treat us worse than animals, the cows they kill immediately, the rest of us little by little, the speed kills you, they give you ice, they give you pain, they give you pills, they tell you have to learn to live with the pain, they don't let you go to the bathroom, people urinate themselves on the line, what safety can there be in the product? Your hands swell and your thumbs lock, I can't sleep at night from the pain. Now, during COVID-19, we're hearing similar comments with an additional layer on top. So they care more about this piece of meat than they care about the workers. In Nebraska, we heard early that supervisors were saying you can come to work even if you have COVID-19, work on the down low, don't worry, nobody has to know. We heard from workers, we're working elbow to elbow, that's why we're getting infected. And I think with that, I will turn to the, oh, I know, I was just gonna mention that in Nebraska, we're working with a statewide group of community-connected, worker-connected, and public health groups to push for critical protections. And as you've been hearing about here, those include especially 6-foot distancing in all areas of the plant, not just in the lunchrooms, but all across the plant, and especially on the processing floor. And also transparency of information, testing, contact tracing, and quarantine, that sort of bundle to make sure that people know if someone in their area has tested positive so that they have the opportunity to quarantine and keep their workforce safe. In more than 20 plants across our state, we're seeing very few examples of these practices. And meanwhile, one of our Tyson plants has 786 cases, another more than 200, the list goes on. So now I'll share a first comment and experience from one worker in one plant. Said, I am a Tyson worker for several decades. I am here to tell you how I contracted coronavirus at the meatpacking plant. It was early April when the rumors started spreading about the first infection cases. There was never an official report on behalf of plant leaders, only information from the workers themselves when someone turned up sick. Soon I saw how my coworkers began to disappear. Personal protection equipment came after the first cases of infection. Right around 2 weeks later, we received face masks and sanitizers. Physical barriers were installed in the lunchroom around the same time, but not in the production floors or the locker rooms where a lot of us gather at the same time during shift change. I have now been out sick for more than a month. My doctor has not released me from care because of further health complications. The plant has continued to call me once a week to ask when I plan to return to work. Whenever my phone rings, my anxiety goes up because they keep on pressuring me to go back as soon as possible. In total, 7 of my coworkers have died, and others that I don't know have also perished. Many people have not been able to return, and some who have returned have declined in their health because they returned before they fully recovered. The plant has not paid me any disability benefits under my insurance policy, and my family is surviving on one income. And then one more worker from a different community in a different plant said, I moved to Nebraska almost 20 years ago. It's a very good place to live. My kids were born in this town. As the virus started, at first everything was okay, but a couple of months passed and everything changed. Changed my life, changed my family with COVID-19. I've been tested positive. The plant is making some changes now, but too late. They started putting sanitizer after there were 6 cases of COVID-19 in the plant. After 3 weeks with sanitizer, they provided us masks, but by then there were already a total of 12 cases. Then I got sick. It's very hard. I infected my wife. Right now, the company tries to check temperatures, but many spaces in the plant are too small or crowded together. The lobby, the locker rooms, the production floor, the microwave in the cafeteria, there's no directions to keep people 6 feet apart. And when everyone comes here to warm their lunch, it's impossible not to touch other people. I have returned to work, but they did not ask me to bring a report saying I tested negative. The company sent us a message letting us know that a coworker died due to COVID-19. My brother is positive, my cousin, my sister, my friend, And today I heard about another 3 friends. I'm really sad. I think the plant has to do something else to create more space to prevent all this contamination because too many people are getting sick. And then he adds, we're working with less staff and the line is running fast. And that's something we heard from the other plant that I shared a story from. That person said that that she's hearing from friends who are still working, that one person is doing the job of 2 to 3 people because they're so short staffed. So that line speed or the work speed for individual workers is increasing even further right now. And so there's going to be increasing injury rates in addition to the COVID cases. That's all I have.
Thank you for sharing that. And I'll just underscore also the importance of the way you're sharing. I'm very glad you were able to share both of those stories and also protect workers' anonymity. Just with retaliation, we hear all this all the time. It's so important, but thank you for being able to read that and share that with us. I think it was really important to hear, all the statistics from everyone, yourself included, Darci, but also to really hear that firsthand experience, because that is what people are living every day right now. I will also mention the work of groups like yours has really created the political space to be able to have all this really important legislation as well. So if you want to support Darci's organization, we're going to be dropping a link in the chat as well as on our Facebook Live, so you can support her there. Also, if you're just joining us, don't forget to sign the petition to protect essential workers via Senate Bill 3677. And that would, again, implement an OSHA, that's Occupational Safety and Health Administration, safety rule. And next, I'm going to pass the mic over to Paula Skelling, a union leader for meat inspection workers from AFGE, the union. Paula,
thank you, Rebecca. Thanks for having me on the forum. And it's some pretty big shoes to fill with the speakers that have previously been on this forum. I represent 6,500 inspection personnel that are employed with FSIS. The inspection duties they perform every day are inspection at slaughter facilities, processing facilities, receiving meat and poultry products, exporting meat and poultry products, and these activities range from very small to large facilities in the United States. At the beginning of the COVID-19 panic, FSIS instructed inspection personnel to not wear any PPE. They stated it would create a panic in plants within the company workers, thinking that our inspector is positive for coronavirus. The inspectors expressed to the union the agency doesn't care about our safety or provide us with any PPEs. They are scared with uncertainty if they would take it home to their families. Northeast Council President Joe Pauly told the agency it was not a matter of if COVID-19 would affect the inspectors, but when. In addition, FSIS told us it was not a matter, at that time, there was no ability for any social distancing or PPEs for inspectors or plant workers. There was no screening of employees prior to entering the facilities. This environment did create an unsafe work environment for inspectors and plant workers. Yes, during the time, the number of affected workers exploded and continues to this day with positive COVID-19 cases. During this time, 4 inspectors have died of COVID-19. This is 4 too many because nothing was done by FSIS to provide PPE to their inspectors. The union has and will continue to inform FSIS management and leadership they need to do more to protect their employees and the people we represent. FSIS has continued to state we are providing PPE to their employees. However, as of the evening of June 3rd, 2020, there remain inspection personnel who have not been provided face shields by FSIS, and this is throughout the country. Yet FSIS is mandating the use while performing inspection duties. In the past weeks, the Department of Agriculture released the reopening playbook. How FSIS applied this to inspectors was mandating these inspectors that were on weather and sick leave because of high risk underlying health concerns back to work. FSIS stated that PPE and plant controls needed to be put in place before the inspectors returned to work. I am aware of an inspector who returned to a multi-plant assignment without FSIS providing PPE or plant controls in place. These plants had no controls in place, no PPE for their plant employees, no social distancing, and nothing following the CDC guidelines. The inspector was provided PPE by FSIS hours after she returned to work. Short version, inspector that is high risk to be put to work in a multi-plant assignment that have no controls to protect or prevent the spread of COVID-19. And since that time, a plant employee 2 days ago tested positive for COVID-19, and there was no action taken. As I see the ongoing issue and my humble opinion in meat and poultry plants, there is no one that has the power or authority to enforce the CDC guidelines. How does the lack of enforcement create a safe work environment for plant workers and inspectors? It doesn't give a safe workplace. Every plant should be required to follow CDC guidelines to protect all workers in that plant. There are some plants that have taken steps implementing plant controls and providing PPE. That needs to happen in every plant throughout this country. In closing, when guidelines are established, create the ability to have enforcement action to protect the workers, and come and please join us in the fight for worker safety and for a better tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula. I just want to underscore like all the different perspectives here that are really sharing different sides of this coin that are saying the same thing. I think Paula, like very much underscoring the inspection side of things gives a really helpful picture to just the scale of the problem that we're dealing with here. And so thank you for sharing that insight and sharing your experience as well. I think people at home will really feel the gravity of the whole situation, especially after tonight. Quick reminder, everyone, if you're joining us from newly or haven't yet, make sure again to sign that petition to protect essential workers. That is Senate Bill 3677. We've put it in the chat. I'm going to actually send an email also tomorrow to reiterate everything from tonight and give you those resources, but definitely look out for that and be sure to take action with us. And last but not least, I'm very excited to finally introduce Axel Fuentes, the Executive Director of Rural Community Workers Alliance in Missouri.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be here today. And wow, what I hear today looks very familiar to what I've been hearing since 12 years ago when I got this community up here. The area where we are working on is a very isolated place. And for you that know that meat processing plants are actually strategically being located in these rural areas where they basically can control everything in the community. I just thoroughly 100% agree with all those issues that Tony, Darci, Congresswoman, Dolores said, and with you, Paula. This is something that is really common to my ears. I just want to remark two things right now, specifically in what I hear about the bathroom breaks and what the workers call speed of line, which is is something that I hear very often up here among the workers. With bathroom breaks, it's hard to believe, but it's true that you still hear people that are defecating on their pants and urinating on their pants. For the audience, at this moment, you're probably asking yourselves how it's possible if we have institutions that can address health and safety. However, I can tell you that in our own experience in the past, we have tried to do that. There is not a regulation. There is not an existing regulation for the companies to be forced to provide bathroom breaks for the workers. In the state of Missouri, not even lunch break is legal. I mean, not even lunch break. So the employers can make you work 24 hours if they want, and they are not obligated to give you a lunch break. So that's why is this problem that we have. So we do have regulations for bathrooms. That means to have a urinals, to have toilets in the building. However, we don't have a regulation for forcing the employer to allow the worker to take a bathroom break when they need. In this company, when we have to try to address this problem and workers approach it management, what the company said is, oh, well, we provide 15 minutes break in the morning, and then workers have a lunch break. Who can actually program the body to go 8 in the morning every day to the bathroom? We cannot do that. So I hear stories from workers that they don't want to even take their medicines because they don't want to drink a lot of water because they know that later they probably are going to be peeing on themselves. I hear the story that that Tony said that regarding women or men wearing diapers. Yes, that's true. I hear that, and I actually personally know a worker that told me that, and she showed me. So this years hear many stories. And regarding the speed of line, which is a very huge issue, we call it speed of line, or workers call it speed of line, but it's no more than the number of pieces of meat that they have to elaborate per minute. Yes, there is no regulation for that too, except for USDA. And Paula probably knows more than me about this, that yes, there is a regulation. USDA can regulate somehow if it's a threat for the products, if it's a threat for the food, but there is not regulation if it's a threat for the health and safety of the workers. So there is no regulation. So it's all up to the companies. Okay. So now you have an idea how the working conditions are in the meat processing plants. So when COVID-19 came to our area or to our country, part of what we do in our organization is empower workers to stand up for themselves, to exercise their rights, and being able, we facilitate tools or connections for them to stand up for their rights. So when COVID-19 came, so friendly and kindly workers approached management through a letter for this company here in Milan, Missouri, requesting some protection, requesting the company to take some measures of prevention of the COVID-19. And the company thoroughly ignored the workers' petition. All they did was to provide some hand sanitizer and use the hallways to install tables for the workers to do not sit close to each other in the cafeteria. So after 2 weeks of the workers requesting improvements and requesting measures, they didn't do anything. The company was running totally normal, workers with no protection. So when we got together with the workers, so we thought, what are we going to do? So workers were totally scared, totally concerned about getting infected. And one of the things that actually workers asked, they were asking the company to go on quarantine. However, the company didn't want to do that. Workers even said, we don't really care if we can miss 6 or 7 weeks of pay, but we don't want to be exposed to die or to get infected. However, the company didn't do anything, so we didn't have other options more than filing a lawsuit. So we talked with really wonderful groups of legal representations, public justice, the Toward Justice, and the Heartland Center for Jobs and Freedom. And we talked about the possibility of filing this lawsuit. So it was until after the filing of the lawsuit when the company started to run and start to hurry up in trying to address the situation, installing plastic dividers between the workers and providing a person actually being putting a person to spray hand sanitizer every 15 minutes. They rented tents and installed outside the plant, installed individual tables to make the workers to sit far away. But that was because the court forced them to comply with the CDC guidelines. And that's how it became the only one and the first plant being forced to comply with the CDC guidelines. You know, the CDC guidelines are voluntary. So they are not forced to do it. And this plant was actually forced to do. So that's how they actually came to take this kind of measures. But still, until today, they have not found a way how prevent crowding in the locker rooms or how to physically separate workers in the work line. So workers are still working shoulder to shoulder, are still crowding in the bathrooms and locker rooms. And now there is only half of the workforce showing up to work because a lot of the workers are with symptoms or they've been actually close to someone who got tested positive. But the lawsuit did a lot. But however, there are not many enforceable things. Last week, we filed a complaint with OSHA. OSHA came to do the inspection, and we do not have results yet. After a week and a half that they came to conduct an inspection in the plant. And well, just because we don't have a lot of time, but just to summarize also, is why we are facing these situations up here is because how our food system runs. We are dependable from just few companies that are producing or processing the meat for the country. And I have to tell you that according to workers from the plant in Milan, 70% of the production is actually for exports, not even for domestic consumption. So they are risking their lives up there to export meat. And we do have a situation also in the CAFOs, the confined animal feeding operation. Just in 30 seconds, I'm going to try to summarize this because it's in Aldine County, Missouri, where actually there are 2 barns where the workers got infected, and they were forced and obligated to show up to work even having symptoms or when they tested positive. Mm. And a lot of those workers, actually most of these workers, except one that I talked to, all of them are working with visas, with work visas. And that's one of the reasons why they are also very afraid, very scared or filing complaints, because these visas are totally controlled by the employer. And they told me, sorry, Axel, we cannot complain. We are talking to you, but please don't tell our employer that we are facing this situation. Otherwise, we are not going to be back to work next year. So it's just to summarize something, and thank you so much for the opportunity.
Of course. And thanks for, I think, bringing that in and I think reiterating too what you were sharing too, Darci, is this is such a huge problem with retaliation that we have to be very careful and mindful of protecting people, how we can, even though that they're not being protected in other ways, obviously. And I think, thank you for sharing also the power of that lawsuit. I think it really underscores how you guys were able to really get protective measures and we're the first in the country, you know, even had to force the hand of the companies by using that legal tool. So if you want to support also Axel's organization, Rural Community Workers Alliance, we're going to also drop the link in the Zoom as well as on Facebook. So please support both Darci and Axel's organizations so they can continue to do this work and continue to bring all of this to light as well. We are going to move to Q&A. We are 2 minutes over 9. We had planned to kind of go 10 over, but I want to be able to give all of my speakers one question to kind of answer that question and bring it home. I'm going to ask them to try to keep it to a minute so that you guys know we're going to be here like a couple minutes past 9, but I think it's really important that we reiterate another moment for them to share with you before we head out. So I'm going to start with Tony, go back to you quickly again in a minute. The question we got, and we got these in from people who RSVP'd, so these are our members talking to us. Does meat from small, sustainable family farms typically get processed in these massive slaughterhouses? You know, we've been talking about a lot today, but do they get processed in these massive slaughterhouses? And are consumers any safer from COVID-19 only purchasing meat from these producers?
Well, thank you for that question. Because the industry has become so concentrated, some of the sustainable farmers wind up having to sell their animals to some of these big slaughter facilities. But there are smaller facilities that can process the animals. One of the things that we got involved with in 2008 during the 2008 Farm Bill was to permit some of the state inspected meat processors to be able to ship their meat across state lines. These are typically these state inspected plants are typically smaller. So right now there are about 70 state inspected plants in 6 states that can send their meat across state lines. But the thing is that you know, even some of the organic meat producers like Applegate Farms, they got gobbled up by some of the big companies like Hormel, because these big companies are smart. They know what consumers are looking for and want to cater to smaller process and to sustainable farmers, and yet they've started to buy up these small companies. This industry has become very concentrated. A few years ago, I did some research going back into old congressional hearings. In the 1970s, there were 12,000 federally inspected plants. We're down to 6,000. It shows how this industry has essentially been cut in half. And so we have to provide a mechanism so that smaller processors can get into the business and compete against the big guys. And as far as the safety of meat, we have to rely on the experts that COVID is not transmissible on meat. It's an airborne virus that attacks the respiratory system. So even if you wind up getting meat that may have had exposure to COVID, by cooking it, you're gonna kill the virus. So that's not something that is more, you know, problematic in a smaller in a bigger plant versus a smaller plant. So the safety issue is not relevant to the size of the plant.
That's right. So it's more about the safety of the workers, really.
Right.
That's right. I'm going to ask a question, Representative DeLauro, for you. Based on your experience in food safety and agriculture policy, we went over a lot of this, and now in your position as the chair of the Labor HHS Appropriations Subcommittee, what are the short-term and long-term policies that need to be adopted to ensure that we have a safe food supply, and at the same time protecting the safety of food production workers? So similar, but kind of what do we need to do? What do you
Well,
recommend?
look, I think we have to be clear about what environment we're in. We have an administration that is either willfully ignorant of how the crisis impacts workers, or they simply don't care. It's my view that this is an administration that really doesn't care. So we have to posit that. So that leads me to a conclusion about getting a different administration. In the meantime, what we need to do is we need to have the CDC strengthen their guidelines for workers to ensure health and safety, getting rid of, if feasible, consider doing any of that BS, excuse me. But the fact is, nobody is listening to the CDC and their guidelines. That was the purpose of the hearing that I held this morning. They are being undermined. So therefore, we have to, and I believe it's in the Congress has got to take on this responsibility and push it and call it out. So there's guidelines have to be enforced. And again, are you going to get an OSHA that is today going to enforce them? It was the Department of Labor Inspector General Scott Dowell said, surprised that OSHA had issued only one citation during the entire COVID-19 outbreak, when he had more than 20,000 plant workers contracted, at least 71 workers have died. So it's, mandating the enforcement and in a way that holds these folks' feet to the fire. The last point is the changes. We cannot allow the industry to get away with weakening the regulations, with speeding up the line to make it impossible for people to be able to do their job and to be safe. I'm going to end where I started. We don't have a federal government that takes any responsibility for any of this. I would love to work with folks here about where there is no PPE, why it isn't distributed, dealing with court cases, and pushing the edge of the envelope in the short term to have them comply and build the external pressure on letting them do that, or shut it down. You go to Smithfield. Smithfield is a Chinese company at the moment. Anyway, so I'll end it there.
Lots of nodding from our panelists, ready to work with you. Thank you for sharing all of that, and definitely the urgency definitely underscored by what everyone shared tonight. I'm gonna go to Darci now in our lineup here. A question for you. I know your experience and expertise around data specifically. How do we get an accurate count of the number of workers in even retail, factory, food processing facilities who have been infected and died from the coronavirus? Are we seeing the numbers, and can we trust them?
This will be a brief response, since it's just incomprehensible to me that in a public health pandemic where data and information are clearly a tool to fight a pandemic, and somehow it's under debate and struggle to try to get any data. So we don't have clear data from our plants or publicly in Nebraska on the numbers of cases that are coming from the plants. We get occasional reports from individual news articles, but no clear data. And I'll just lift up again that it's one of the central concerns that we hear from working people across the state, that they're also not getting any transparency of information inside the plants. And no one's asking for the personal test results of individual people or who's testing positive. They just want to know, is anyone in my area testing positive, so that we can have an effective contact tracing and quarantine process that would protect us and would protect the food production continuing. And in neither of those spaces do we have clear information.
Thank you. My next question I have for you, Paula, is there's a question around OSHA regulations and guidelines. Someone actually saw recently on an episode of MSNBC, they were showing the current OSHA policy was minimizing the need for PPE and other safety measures based on the current administration's pushback. Is this true? I think might have been answered tonight, but if so, how can frontline employees be assured that they'll be protected? Can you speak to that question?
Yeah, and the sad answer is I don't know, because we have the federal government that's not providing the PPEs to the federal inspectors. We're hearing tonight that they're not providing it to the plant workers, and none of it is being followed, which goes back to, I think, Congresswoman Dolores' comments. We've got to have that ability to be able to enforce these things of what the CDC needs to be, those guidelines that the plants need to follow. And if they don't, shut their asses down. Plain and simple. Sorry for the language, but it's true. I think that answers the question a little bit with maybe a little too much passion, but yeah.
That's okay. We like spice.
Be enforced.
Very good. And Axel, the last question for you. We also kind of covered, I have this one question here about the lawsuit. You covered that, but more broadly than that, what can people do? We've heard a lot about the problems. We know that we want to pass this OSHA rule. We know that we need to strengthen that, but what can we do to support workers and help address these issues now? Is there anything broader?
Well, I think what people can do is get aware and think beyond the package of meat that they can buy in the store. Know who they are buying from, where the meat is coming from, and dig a little bit about what the conditions are in these plants. That will help a lot, because it's a pressure actually coming from the consumers, who are the ones that at the end, they are the ones that are going to decide if they buy or not. Another thing is support other kind of policies that are being promoted, especially when it's about government consumption. When for example, school districts or cities, it should be a call also that if the companies doesn't comply with that, so they should not be spending money in those companies. There is campaigns going on, especially Food Chain Workers Alliance has one that is the Good Food Purchasing Policy, which actually will help. But and another thing is support organizations on the ground, because we are actually empowering the workers. That at the end is, if the workers stop, that is another story. And in this plant, for example, is only half of the workforce is showing up to work. But also, if we don't really have laws to support the workers' efforts, it is very, very hard too. So I will say, and I will call for the consumers to please help and be aware of where the meat is coming from. Thank you.
Thank you. So be aware, pass legislation, and also the layers of people being undocumented. It's really important to support organizations like yours that are bringing this to light to be able to do that. So thank you for that. I know we're a couple minutes over here, but I think I'm going to wrap us here. You heard a lot tonight, and I want to give a special thank you to all of our speakers for being here, for sharing their side of the coin and this kind of wicked problem that we have here. We have a lot to move forward, including supporting that Senate bill that I mentioned that's going to work on that OSHA rule. I want to say thank you again to my whole team, including Tony, for putting this together and helping us get us all here tonight and making this possible. And I want to say thank you to all of our viewers here who are joining us in this movement and getting activated around bringing all of this to light and working on this as well. So again, call and meet with your senators and representatives. Make sure you send them a message. I'm going to send you a note tomorrow with all of this included to help you get started. And it is now more important than ever to get involved with changing our broken food system. We have these movement leaders and all of you to do it. So thank you for joining us tonight. Stay safe, and we will see you next time.